Welcome to Practice Disrupted, a podcast where we find ways to create new solutions to current challenges while elevating the value of architects. I'm your host, Evelyn Lee, an architect who spans tech as an angel investor, startup advisor, and founder of Practice of Architecture. Whether you're a seasoned architect or just starting in the field, this podcast is your gateway to think differently about the role architects play within our global community. Hello, Disruptors. Welcome back to this week's episode of Practice Disrupted. Today, we're bringing on two incredible human beings who are working to level the playing field for women and non-binary individuals by closing the technology gap at work. They are Helen Lee Kupp and Nichole Sterling, the two co-founders of Women Defining AI. Helen is no stranger to Practice Disrupted. She is a past coworker of mine at Slack and friend. She is also the co-author of the Wall Street Journal bestselling book, How the Future Works, Leading Flexible Teams to Do the Best Work of Their Lives. She believes in closing the gender technology gap, starting with women at work, to create a future of work that looks and feels fundamentally different for her two kids and the women she mentors. Nichole is a utility leader blending strategy, marketing, HR, and finance in the tech industries. Her impact on company success ranges from returning $4 million year over year to field operations teams through corporate learning initiatives, increasing sales pipeline activities by 10 to 30 times by establishing a RevOps philosophy, and even driving innovation within local municipal government. Nichole's current focus is on developing AI technologies, leading a stealth company specializing in digital twins, and perhaps there's more that we can explore there a little within this conversation, and AI agents. A fervent advocate for women in tech, Nichole combines her passion for AI with a commitment to ethical and inclusive technology. I believe that the two of you are incredible representatives of what we have been calling portfolio career builders, and we could probably actually have another entire episode on that alone. But today we're diving into Women Defining AI. So Nichole and Helen, we're just going to break the ice and jump right in. Is there anything not, I should say, on your typical bio that you can share with our listeners?
We like to have fun. Like Helen and I got into this, to just to make a difference. And I think that's something that we want folks to always know, is that this learning can be fun and we want it to be accessible. And, that's what we're here for. So.
Yeah. I mean, aside from fun, Nichole's like one of the most fun co-founders to have to build something. I basically think a lot about working with Nichole as a parallel to building and teaching in AI, where I'm just like, one of the most important things with really ramping up on generative AI is both to think about how it can be useful and really be thoughtful about, like the work use cases, but equally as important is the personal use cases and the fun ones where you have these aha moments. Like today in our community, they're in the part of the program where they're generating music and songs as part of their AI project. And I think it's just this pairing of not taking it too seriously, as well as, learning and building something useful. Doing those two things is a definition of how Nichole and I work and build, Women Defining AI, but also just us as people and our personalities.
I want the two of you to actually talk about how you met, because I think in today's distributed space, there's a lot of naysayers, around work, even when it comes to virtual environments. So could you guys talk a little bit about that?
Well, so yeah, I'll start off. So I saw Helen give a talk at a conference that we were at. It was a conference for operators. And I remember her talking, it was something, future work, blah, blah, blah. But mostly it was like her focus on women and AI, and her wanting to She had talked a little bit about her referencing the book that she had written. And it was about these, how the future works. It was about having these remote instances, and it was okay. And you can still get work done because really, work, or the way that work was designed, was not for today's worker, right? Women, people of color, that kind of thing. And, all I thought was, she's cool. I'm going to connect with her on LinkedIn. And that was it. And she was one of 2 people who I connected with. And that was it after that conference. I was like, I don't really know what it'll turn into or what it's for, but I'll just connect and figure it out later. And then it was quite literally probably about a couple of months later. And honestly, at the conference, I don't even think we said hello to each other. I was just like, I'll just connect.
No, I was going to say, you didn't say hi. We did not meet in person. You just connected with me.
Yeah, I was just like, that. She's cool. I'll just connect with her, figure it out later. And then it was a couple months later that I'd seen a post come through on my LinkedIn that she was, thinking about starting this women defining AI. She had some rough ideas around it. I was like, oh, well, goodness, this is something I've been thinking about, is how do we get more women talking about AI? There's so much out there, but where are all the women voices? And so quite literally, I saw the post. I reached out to her. I said, hey, do you need help with this? What are you doing? I want to do it. I've been I've been thinking about doing something similar. What help do you need? And then that's when it got started.
Yeah. Little did I know that Nichole would be cooler than me, for one. When you were like, oh, she's cool, I'm going to connect. And I always say, had Nichole not reached out to me, I think that Women Defining AI would have been kind of a fun experiment. What I had in my head was, hey, I kind of want to explore and learn AI and build some things. And maybe it'll be useful to bring a small study group together of a handful of women. But it was an experiment. It was an experiment for me. It was an experiment for the both of us. And if it was just me building this, I think I talk about how we dropped everyone into Slack, and Slack gives you this sort of 90-day free trial. And so at the end of 90 days, I was like, oh, well, maybe either this was the end of the experiment, or we would have something here and we would need to figure out what we wanted to do in earnest. And having Nichole around to be that sort of second half of the building team, even though we quite literally have never met in person, even though she saw me at a conference. We had that first conversation over the phone where it just took 30 minutes. And I was like, yes, values aligned. This is great. Let's try it. Let's just try to build something together. And then over the course of those 3 months, through our kind of conversations in Slack channels, the ways which we were sort of tackling different projects together and with the people who signed up, we knew that there was something here. We loved working together, in that sort of async and hybrid kind of mode. The best part was we really we had not seen each other. We had not seen many of the women in the community ever. And then last month, actually, we had an opportunity to partner with someone to host a small intimate dinner in the Bay Area. And Nichole flew in and a handful of other people showed up from the community. And you would think that 8 months of being in a community, never seeing each other, only our Slack photos wouldn't be enough. But we walked in and it just felt like a mini reunion. You would have never known that we had never met in person, any of us. It was so cool. We found out that we were all about the same height. Basically, we're all really short people,
For sure.
which was amazing, except for Shella, right? Shella was much taller than everyone else. And it was just so fun. I feel like we were, despite being 50% of the dinner, we sort of co-opted it to be basically a mini Women Defining AI reunion. And it was the most incredible thing. And the thing that I often point people to is sometimes we forget that we take it for granted that we need to be in person. We have to have these networking events to build relationships. But usually what happens is that it's really superficial, right? It's inch deep. But when you have a community where you are or you have opportunities to learn together, to collaborate on things, like we wrote a community perspective paper, we are building with different AI models and experimenting together. When you're getting something done, you're in the trenches together, whether that's in person or in this sort of async or hybrid mode, you get a chance to really get to know one another. And that part of it, that's what builds those deep relationships. And so when we met in person, it was just, I mean, that dynamic was obvious, right? Even though it was the very first time.
And I also think there was still kind of, despite that we had come together, we hadn't known each other, we just started working with each other, trying to figure out what this thing was. I think there was a pivotal moment. And Helen always likes to tell the story of how we wanted to have our first study group. And it was like, I think there was an article posted about building a chat bot. And I kind of looked into it. I was like,
yeah, someone was charging $2,000 to build a custom AI chatbot.
That's right. Yeah, it was $2,000. And and I kind of took a look at it and I was like, well, that's BS. I mean, why would you charge that much? Helen and I, we have this ethos of just like, let's make it accessible. We got to get access, to this AI and this technology. So anyways, I took a weekend, I kind of hammered against it and I was like, and I got it working, a custom chatbot with code. And I never coded before, at least not deliberately, and pulled it together. And I sent it to Helen on Monday morning. I was like, hey, I got it to work. She's like, wait, what? And I think at one point, yeah, you like to tell how, like you said, well, hey, do you want us to find like engineering help or, someone to do it, to help assist? And I was like, no, let me just give it a go. Let me just try this thing, and got it to work. And within a couple of weeks, we had held a lunch and learn and actually ran the community through in an hour and had them build their own custom chatbot. And so I think it was like, that was a very pivotal moment for both of us, because we said, wait a second, we can do this. We can totally do this. And it was in this idea of demystifying AI and like what's in the black box became a real kind of rallying call for us. And it's built into our mission vision. And it was that moment where we demystified it for ourselves, that we said, oh, okay, yeah, we can go and do this for other folks as well.
Yeah, I think what's really important for people to understand is women defining AI is actually filled with, I would say, a majority of non-technical people who are working together trying to figure this out. People who don't typically code, or people who don't even have like engineering or developer in their titles, right? It's even a lot of people we have attorneys in there, we have learning and development specialists in there, we have managers of both technical and non-technical teams that are all just trying to figure out how to use this technology going forward. So before we jump into a little bit more, I know you guys have some statistics around adoption of technology and women in the field. Can you help me run through some of those and that technology gap that we've referred to, but we haven't yet to call out in this conversation that we're trying to close?
Yeah, there's a longstanding gender tech gap overall, but when it comes to AI, part of, the genesis of why bring women together to experiment with AI in the first place with us, there was this study done last year, right before we started the community, that showed that for generative AI technology, less than a third of women were using AI in their work or personal lives, compared to more than half of men. And that might not seem like a big deal at first blush, but it really becomes a big deal when you think about overall representation in STEM fields by women. It tends to be less than a third. It also matters when you think about who gets portrayed, who gets to speak about technology, especially the latest and greatest. And I'll be honest, like as a mom of a 2-year-old daughter, like I think about the role models that she has in terms of who is being, the voices that are defining this space. And it's just that statistic made me and Nichole realize that we needed to change this. And if it continues from one tech innovation to the next, like we'll never get enough people at the beginning of the pipeline, right, to solve this problem. And you see that all the time in the discussions that we have in the community, the types of use cases that come up with women trying to like figure out what this looks like in their work and personal lives. It's a very different conversation than the ones that we see external to the community that are highly male dominated. So yeah, that's the big data point.
Yeah. And, and the reason why it's important that women are staying close to AI and following the developments is that we're starting to see different behaviors from workplaces. More workplaces are looking for AI fluency. They're looking for AI skills. So as Helen mentioned, there's already a gap, right, just from a STEM perspective. But if now workforces and workplaces are looking for AI fluency in their skill sets, women are just going to continue to fall behind. And there's lots of different reasons that we've been surfacing just within the community as to why that is, in addition to some of the research, right? So typically women are more hesitant of AI. They consider that there's more perhaps safety issues, as they should. They are throwing out the yellow flags to say, hey, is this a concern? Yes, it is a concern. This is why we need you as a part of the development and the deployment process. There's also some very interesting things that are popping up in terms of women in thinking that this feels like cheating. I can't engage with, if I use AI, then it's like I'm cheating at my job or anything. And that just struck me as wild. It was not where I first initially went to, but the more women that I talked to, I just ran a Wine Women and AI session last night in my community. And there were several hands that were raised of this feeling that I'm cheating. I'm not being my authentic self. And this is my response to women who say that. For decades, CEOs have had a personal assistant. They've had someone to bounce ideas off of. They've had somebody to give the first draft. They've had someone, to do some of the work before it reached the final process or the final draft. And I said, now that's your opportunity. You now have the opportunity to do that with AI, as Helen had mentioned, not just to help with the work use cases, but also the use cases at home. One of our favorite projects that we like to do with the community is take ChatGPT, take a picture of your refrigerator, and ask it to create a recipe for you at the end of the day. That's just helping you live. That is just helping you do the day-to-day. So when I hear that as a reason why more women aren't getting involved, listen, now is your time. You just never had the opportunity before.
So what I love about this community too is, for me, it is so hard to keep up with the various different aspects of AI as it's gaining momentum and changing over time. But it's been a great collection of people and subject matter experts in their own industry verticals that are posting to the channel or posting to the Slack workspace what is most relevant to them. And then I can kind of pick and choose, but this is also relevant to me, and I need to make sure that I'm looking at and following that for my own job. The other great thing that is happening in the community is that you guys are coming out with these papers and you're posting them to the public. And the latest one was focused on, the latest three, I should say, right? It's in 3 parts, is responsible AI in action, balancing regulation, ethics, and the future. So Nichole, can you talk, I know you've been editing these papers. Can you talk a little bit about this latest series and anything related to data privacy, which is something that architects are really struggling with as more of our output, and what we consider the work that we do against our contracts is purely digital?
Yes, this was our first series, and we decided to launch this as our first because there was just so much happening from a regulation standpoint. If any of your data touches the European Union, you've got to follow the EU AI Act. And this was some of the things that we parsed out in the 3-part series. It was meant to be 1, but we had so much that we decided, we've got to make 3. And so that first one is all around the regulatory landscape. What do you listen to if you are an AI business? while we know a lot of folks that are reading those papers are kind of from an enterprise standpoint, we also tend to also want to help out the small businesses, right, who may not have the resources and may not know what to really listen in on. And so those papers, especially in part one, when we were looking at the regulatory landscape, it's like, here's what you really have to know. Like, just get through all the hype and get through all the information that's there and really just focus on these things. And then over here are some nice to knows, right? We really tried to distill it down well for folks. And then in part two, it was really all around, what businesses can do if they have an AI product. What are the protocols that they need to put into place? For instance, first up was talking about taking an inventory of all your AI tools. Like, what exactly are you using? What is considered high risk? And so, Evelyn, when we talk about data privacy and making sure and knowing whether or not data has, PII, the personal information on it, like those are big deals. And especially in some of the regulated industries, where states are starting to come forward and say no to things like automated decision making, right? Meaning that I can't make a decision necessarily, or my company can't make a decision on whether or not you get a loan just based off AI. So there's lots of regulations that are coming down regarding that. But yeah, data privacy is a big deal. And especially if your data is touching the European Union, you're going to have even more regulation on you. Here in the United States, we're still figuring that out. We have Biden's executive order, but nothing really is sticking at this point. And there's a lot of things that are being said that's going to happen, but a lot of folks, even here in the United States, they're really following what's happening with the EU AI Act. And so, then going back to data privacy, whether, you're scoping out your AI tools, you're identifying what's high risk, what's low risk, in part three, what we talk about is, okay, well, what's going to happen in the future? What should you start doing in order to prepare for all this regulation and all these things that you should be doing for your AI tools and your AI business? And one of the things that I'm actually kind of very interested in and I'm following really closely is these creations of cross-functional teams, cross-functional AI committees. I currently sit on For Humanities. For Humanity is an organization, it's a nonprofit that's working to help create the auditing criteria for these new AI tools. And so I sit on the large language model, the large multimodal model, and digital worker committee that actually creates the auditing criteria for auditors and for businesses. And, one of the things that just is hard for small businesses is like, okay, I'm supposed to have an ethics committee. Okay, I'm supposed to have an algorithmic risk committee. How as a small business am I going to stay on par and keep up with enterprises that have the resources, that have the money? And, For Humanity is one of the organizations that I got involved with because they'll help you get that talent, right? So when we're talking about ethics committees, you got to have somebody who's actually really well versed in ethics and the state and the statutes around it and everything. And so, one of our predictions is you're going to see a lot of more of that come up, those cross-functional teams, whether that's having DEI professionals. Our authors really hit on this point, and that DEI has been like a really diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a buzzword, and it's been kind of a nice to have. But boy, oh boy, do we see an opportunity where those folks can be front and center, especially on these cross-functional teams, and to dig into products and assess what are, the impacts from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. That's really exciting too. And then, of course, like some of the rise of these folks that are just focusing like a chief AI officer, pulling all these folks together in order to make sure that the data privacy is locked in, that bias is being put into check, right? Helen and I have talked in the past about that stable diffusion study that was done where, oh my goodness, this stable diffusion being a text to image large language model. So you enter in your text and then it spits you out an image. And wow, did it feel like we were going backward here in our progress in the representation of women? Because when you would type in the word judge into Stable Diffusion, it would only about 7% of the images came back as women. when 34% of US judges are women. Or you take the fact that you type in fast food worker and 70% of the time darker skin tones came back in the images, when 70% of all fast food workers in the United States are white. And so there is a real opportunity, unfortunately, where if those images and that bias continues to get baked into our large language models and people aren't educated on it, right? There's a feeling sometimes like, some of that progress that we've gained over the last several decades just feels erased very quickly. And so that's why these cross-functional teams need to come together in our organizations. Data privacy, in addition to bias, need to be addressed by these teams to make sure we're creating ethical, responsible, and safe AI. That was a really long answer.
It's a long answer because I think it's a really important one, and it's nuanced enough that it's one of the reasons why we started this initiative around writing community perspective papers, is because, one, like so much of what's happening in the media with AI is inch deep, right? It feels very hypey, it feels very short form, and there's not enough out there. You sort of have to piece together a lot of different things to say, okay, so what do I do with this information? And how do I integrate that with the series of, news and updates and information that's coming through? Things in the AI field, because we're so early still, is evolving so fast that it feels like you're just like drinking from the fire hose of AI news, right? And then the second is because there are these like topics that are evergreen, that it is about just continuing to integrate and learn what's the right path here, because there is no like right answer. There's just sort of, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're doing. And I think that's a big reason why we started to write these community perspective papers, is to bring multiple voices together to dissect a really meaty and important topic. But I will also emphasize that so much of this is about getting like hands-on experience with some of these tools and technologies. I think what I'm seeing enterprises and people in corporations get wrong is to be too fearful of all the data security conversations and ethical conversations, that they're like, well, we're just not going to do it. We're not going to try. And the problem with doing that is that AI is being baked into all of our tools and software, whether we like it or not. And if it is behind a feature and you don't know what are the potential edges to this technology, and you don't know to ask those questions, then you are inherently using something that might be biased, might have issues and risk, and you won't know. And a lot of the reasons why we're like, just experiment with it in small ways, it doesn't even have to be that serious, is really to build that intuition around like, what are the questions that you should be asking? What are some of those edges? Like, how is that changing? And how do you integrate all of the things that sound really hypey right now, and like what's real and what's not, right? A really great example is there was a lot of news about like video generation and how amazing you have these like Pixar-like quality video generation type of things. Oh my goodness, it's going to put tons of creatives out of work. And like, yes, it's going to change the industry for sure. But if you play around with the tool, one, if you know nothing about creating art and video, like myself, I'm a Excel person. So like the farthest you could get from being creative, you don't know the right terms, the right things to prompt. And it just, you can only generate a few seconds of video at a time. So it's not a full like movie. And you get some really funky things if you don't get it right. And that's like a fun experiment. But I think that it takes really just trying it to see like, oh, it's not perfect. It can feel like magic sometimes, and it can feel like absolute crap other times. And getting hands-on is the only way that you know that. And so, yeah, I would say like the biggest thing is don't avoid the ethical and data security conversations. It really just takes diving in and navigating that.
What do you say? So I've found this, Helen, you and I have kind of talked extensively about this, though, is people jump into AI not necessarily with this experimental mindset while they're doing it, and they have a bad first impression, and that becomes their overall first impression. So what is your response to individuals to kind of encourage them to keep experimenting?
I would say that it never is like a good response the first time. This is true. Partly, one, because usually when you're trying things out the very first time, you're probably trying a free tool. That's one. And free tools are using models that are lower performing. I mean, they have to because it's free. And so the output doesn't feel as magical. I think the other thing is also we hear so much hype in the news that it feels like it should feel like magic from the beginning. But actually, AI is software. And if you've ever been, adjacent to, technical roles, you'll know that building with software, there's a lot of just like iterations involved. And that's really why they call it prompt engineering. It's not because it's a technical thing. It's because it's this emphasis on like getting good output from AI, just like you do from code, is that it takes iterations. It takes practice. It takes, honestly, with just like a ChatGPT and a text-based model, it's just about asking follow-up questions or showing examples of good, like what do you actually want? And it'll learn pretty quickly, but it's really, I encourage you to try even just asking for additional follow-up questions and see where that gets you. It's as simple as that, right? It's not about taking a course to be the best prompt engineer possible. It's about just nudging the AI to do a bit better. And I kid you not, I have a lot of chat logs that I've shared with people where I'm doing data analysis with ChatGPT and trying to get it to create more, charts and data visuals. And my follow-up statement is just make it more beautiful. More beautiful, please. And it's shocking. It works because generative AI is weird. It's really weird. And it does stuff like that. The other thing that I usually coach people on is like, think of these AI models as kind of like an entry-level intern and how you might work with an intern, right? You don't expect magic right away, but if you coach it enough, if you scope it well enough, you give it specific enough instructions, then the output you get is higher quality. And thinking about that way, rather than thinking about it as a magic wand, often helps in terms of how you work with it and get the thing that you want on the other end.
You probably have just as many examples as I do, Helen, where there was this idea that I had to take the prompt engineering course. I had to, download and buy the prompt engineering library or whatnot. And I think you and I are both on the same page when we say, no, just get in there. Just ask it a question. And like you said, you kind of treat it like the junior intern or whatnot. How would you guide someone through what it is that you're asking for, right? Some people have even said it's like asking my kid to do something. Well, yeah, there's usually a set of instructions. You can't just say, do this and then expect the output that's in your head. It's not that magical, as you said.
So I feel like we've gone a little bit on the doom and gloom and we're on the upswing with some kind of encouragement. A lot of people talk about how many jobs that are going to be lost due to AI. I want to look at the potential opportunity that new technology usually creates on the other side. So there's a lot there. What do you see on the horizon in terms of new opportunities and new potential job roles coming out of this technology?
Like what I kind of alluded to before, with even within our businesses and folks who are trying to build AI products, that DEI might have a new role. Like they might shift a bit and be more within the product scene. We're going to see chief AI officers or folks who are actually overseeing, the production and the implementation of AI. Just like any technology that has been disruptive in our past, there's always been, lifts, shifts, and maybe drifts. Yes, as Helen had mentioned before, there's going to be some disruption. The chatbot, the news story that came out where the chatbot replaced 700 employees. Yeah, that's pretty significant. then like what I want to think about is, okay, and then there's also always about the software developers. There's no software developers. My eldest son called me and said, Mom, I'm not going to have a job after I graduate. And I said, no, you'll still have a job. But yes, will there be less of something needed? Will there be less of software developers? Will there be less of potential customer, engagement specialists? Yeah. And yet there will be new opportunities into the future. I don't think that it'll really obliterate any type of job function, even our artists, right? There's a lot of concern that it'll just completely get rid of artists. But as we've mentioned, it can be magical on one day and it can be crap on the other. You still need the experts. You still need these experts to say, oh, this is where it's going wrong. Let me take this as a first draft. Thank you, AI. Thank you for my first draft. And now let me, with my expertise, mold this into the thing that it needs to be. Right. So I don't see where it's going to, I think there's a lot of doomsday out there in terms of it's just going to completely, obliterate certain professions. And I'm open to see what it creates that we don't know yet. There could be some really cool things and jobs that are created that we're just not aware of at this point.
There's a discussion around like, is AI going to generate the next single employee billion-dollar business?
The CEO of OpenAI kind of said like AI is going to generate the next single person unicorn or something like that.
Yes. And that speaks to both the doom and gloom and the opportunity, right? Because yes, I think that with AI, we will be able to do a whole lot more as an individual, but it also opens up this opportunity that I'm really excited about, which is to create more builders and creators in this world. I think that if you aren't stuck doing the sort of like, bottom level things, you have more and more opportunity to think big about like, what's the thing you're building? How big could this be? What are the really big opportunities? And I use that as an anchor, right? Like the single person billion-dollar business, because versions of that are very true, even just like within our jobs, right? There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with AI in terms of what it generates, right? Images, sound, etc. But I actually think the power is in thinking through the shit work that you have every day that you just are like, this is so manual. I hate this part of my job. How can you use AI to really reduce the load on the things that like you don't want to spend time on, that are kind of repetitive and not interesting, that are not, creative, and to use the technology to say, okay, how can I simplify that, automate that, whatever that looks like, and then really focus your energy and time on the craft, right? I think that is really powerful. And the more that we do that, the more we will actually see jobs and the shape of jobs really change and shift. And I think that is for the better. I think that gives people more freedom to step into more of that higher level thinking, creative work, and building like net new types of things that we didn't have time and space to do before. So that part is really cool.
I was just going to add, with the shifts that's going to happen with work, one of the things that we also talk about a lot are, what does that new employee, or what are the skill sets the employee needs to have in the AI era? And we talk about the power skills. Typically they used to be called traditionally the soft skills, nice to haves, but we really think that in this new AI era, the power skills of problem solving, critical thinking, adaptability, those are going to be crucial, because if AI allows you to sort of level the playing field from a technical standpoint, or from the domain experience, then what's left? Well, you've got to be able to have the ability to critically think about what the outputs are. You still, to be in this era, to be human is ever more important, because you still have to test, you still have to interact with other humans, right? And so to those power skills, and we talk about the shifting that's going to happen with work, I bet you're going to see a lot more companies focusing on those things, because AI just becomes an equalizer from domain experience.
So architects in general, focusing back on the field and the industry that I am in and this podcast is about, are really late at adopting technology. For instance, I know a lot of architects have moved into this building and modeling 3D space, but they're still using it as for two-dimensional drawings. They've purchased the software. The software has the power to do new things, and they're not using it to its full extent. So what words of advice or encouragement do you have for an industry that is typically late at adopting these type of technologies, whether it's to kind of slowly ease them into it or even kind of light the fire to get them going in this space?
Why do you think that's happening, Evelyn?
So this is a huge generalization. And I do think there's absolutely, as with anything, a lot of outliers and architects that are doing an incredible award-winning work and writing their own scripts and writing their own code and algorithms on top of other tools. But I think a part of it is because there's this artist mindset or modality with architects that if they are not the ones creating, like the tool just becomes that. It's not necessarily a partnership in their creation as much as it is a means to the end to, I have to produce these drawings to implement my creation. I also think, the architecture is really interesting. People tend to retire really late in architecture, which means that the leaders that are making decisions, or the ones that are making decisions about how things happen within organizations, are on the older side of things. In fact, I think there's a lot of conversations right now that's happening with the lack of firm leadership transition as we're looking at how the baby boomers and that generation will begin to age out. But I also think those individuals tend to gravitate towards the way they've always done things. So there's that. And then finally, I think there is this gatekeeping mentality that we've had in the industry, which means that you don't know enough for us to allow you to show up on site with us. So heavens forbid you suggest a new technology that has us jump over these other hoops, because you're not there. We need you to pass through these other gates to get there. So it's all encompassing, and I think it's really culturally rooted, unfortunately, but it's something that I'm trying to change.
Architects are not the only one, for what it's worth. I feel like I've had a similar conversation with the legal profession, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear you on all of those points. What I would say, in case this does help light the fire, is look, we've had a lot of major technical innovations over the last couple of decades, but this is one that is absolutely not going away. It is not only not going away, it is accelerating in the amount of innovation, what's possible, that's really changing fundamental paradigms in the technology space and the creation space, that ignoring it would be like ignoring the fact that the internet was coming, right? It's huge. And you get that sense when you start to experiment with it about how much of a paradigm shift it truly, truly is. But I will also say, I said this to a bunch of lawyers once when they were talking about how, being a lawyer is about doing your diligence, right? Law school is about memorizing lots and lots and lots of cases and learning to absorb data really fast. And the funny thing is it's a ton of work. And you move to this model of creating a law firm that it's all about billable hours. And it is a very classic innovator's dilemma where you're yes, this is how we've always done it. But someone is going to come by and create a completely new type of law firm that doesn't require all of these hours to scour books and legal cases, and is going to win. And and not only will people be happier because it's faster and cheaper, but the people running the business and doing law in that way are going to be happier because they don't have all this crazy research work and looking through stacks and stacks and stacks of paper and discovery and stuff. And so it's almost there is a better for both sides of the equation, and it just takes some very innovative people to be like, you know what? This can be different in big ways. And it's coming. There's always those people, and it's coming whether or not you want it to come. And so my advice is just lean into it. There's some parts of it that are incredible, and you don't have to use AI in the parts of your work that are very core to like your creation process. That's fine, right? This is why Nichole and I talk a lot about like, let's think more expansively about how you experiment with these tools and see what's possible. Think about the things that you don't want to do. Think about the meal planning stuff, right? Like get versed on what's possible before you start to think about, does this replace the thing that I do that is very authentically me? You may just be like, you know what, that's like, I have my process for doing, architecture in this way. Just like I could use AI to write my damn LinkedIn post, but I don't, because it's just me. And I want to write it my way. And it takes me a little bit longer, but that is me. And I'm fine with that. I've tried it in multiple versions now, multiple ways. And that's okay. That's okay. No one's saying that like you need to change a piece of it that you don't want to change. What we're saying is like, it's really worth experimenting with it, at least in parts of your work and personal life, so that you get a sense for what's possible and not just ignore, this innovation that's coming for all industries.
So as you all are looking towards the future of WDAI and women defining AI, can you share any upcoming projects, courses, collaborations? Where are you guys focused relative to the community for the remainder of at least 2024?
So we still have some community perspective papers that we're going to be releasing. Our next one will come up in Q2 that's focused on AI and strategy. And then throughout the year, we're going to release subsequent ones, such as, and even have some industry specific. So AI in education, AI in healthcare. So we're still going to make sure we're getting our community members to write those and to just do the deep dives and, cut through all the hype. And then what we have are just various community classes, lunch and learns. Of course, we have the 30 Days of Gen AI. That is our flagship course where every day you're given a project, like a 5-minute project to do. And we've broken those up into 3 different modules between beginning and advanced use cases. But those folks who are looking for a cost-effective way to just start doing AI every day and understand where the guardrails are and what can it do really great and what does it do really crappy, that's free with our membership. And so that's definitely something that we're going to continue to build out. And then, of course, like I said, we have just our various lunch and learns. And we really do pull from our community members. We have folks who are going to be talking about, how to get your first job with AI and product. We have someone coming in who's going to be talking about how do you actually get into the upper executive levels when you're a minority woman, right? How do you traverse that narrative? And then again, where we can spread the word from an external standpoint and get more women supporting women, that'll continue to be our focus.
Hi, Disruptors. Thank you for joining us today on an episode of Practice Disrupted. If you like the content for today's show, you can find all of our past episodes over on practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. Be a part of the conversation by joining me, our speakers, and other disruptors in our community at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Our social media handle is Practice of Arch. That's Practice of ARCH. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to drop us a DM and say hello. Tune in next week for a new conversation on change in the profession.